Hello, I am Yvonne Brown, the founding artistic director of Seicento Baroque Ensemble, Colorado's premier vocal group specializing in the historic performance of music from the 1700s and the 1600s, the Seicento. We are presenting the Bach St. John Passion, a work that was written for and first performed on Good Friday in 1724, nearly 300 years ago. When we give our concerts in Arvada, Denver, and Boulder this May to 2023, we will be the first choir in Colorado to perform this monumental work using period instruments, the ancestors of our modern instruments, the instruments that Bach wrote for. Then the miracles of technology, I've gathered my friends and colleagues to talk about different aspects of this undertaking. We have Dr. Deborah Kaufman speaking about the role of the choir and the compositional form Bach uses. We have Dr. Mimi Mitchell speaking about the passion for passions in Europe and in the Netherlands, where she lives and works. Soprano Amanda Balistrieri speaks about singing with period instruments and what a difference that makes to her vocal goals and her joys. Keith Collins, one of only 4 people in the U.S. who plays a bassano grosso, or a great bassoon, will talk about that instrument and the role it has in the St. John Passion. Our apprentice artist, Nathan Jensen, will speak about his experience learning to sing in a style that's so different from his university training in opera. Santiago Herrera, our tenor section leader in the choir, has some thoughts about the choral experience and about Bach's works and singing Bach. And I am honored to have esteemed baritone Max von Egmond on this video. Max sang and recorded Bach arias, including the St. John Passion, in the earliest recordings with period instruments. This series right here, Telefunken. He sang the role of Jesus in the first historically informed performance of the Bach St. Matthew Passion in the Netherlands. So 50 years ago, they were on the cutting edge, breaking ground in the Netherlands with the first period instrument performance, something that we're doing this year in Colorado. I hope with this video that you'll gain insight into my choice to perform this complex and complicated work. I welcome to you and to my colleagues. As the artistic director of Seicento, I'm thrilled to have Mimi Mitchell as our concertmaster for the St. John Passion. She's playing first violin and leading the orchestra from her stand. Mimi joins me today from her home in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, where she has made a career playing the Baroque violin, lecturing, researching, and especially researching period performance or historically authentic movement, a phrase that has come to mean that the players and singers try to stay true to what we know to be the style and technique and instrumentation of the music of the Baroque era. Mimi and I met in graduate school at the Shepherd School of Music at Rice University at a time when early music was just blossoming in Texas and in the US, and Mimi was influential to me personally in pursuing a career in Baroque music. Welcome, Mimi.
Thank you. I'm getting excited to be coming to Colorado and to play the first ever historical instrument, St. John's Passion in Colorado. So yeah, I'm already looking forward to it.
We're looking forward to it too, Mimi. You bring a wealth of knowledge and information to us in Colorado, a lot of support to Seicento through your teaching and your lecturing and your playing. And you're a wonderful partner in this huge musical undertaking, Colorado's first ever performance of Bach's St. John Passion on period instruments. Tell me, Mimi, what do you see as the difference between performing this work with modern instruments and historic instruments?
Well, of course, it's what I do, and it's my passion is to play on these instruments. And the idea is that to play on the instruments of the period gets us a bit closer to how it might have sounded in the past. Baroque instruments are softer than a modern orchestra would be, and that allows the singers and the choir to do different things when they don't have to work so hard to project.
Well, that said, there are a lot of really loud moments in this work. A number of them for the choir, which plays several roles in the work. They play the part of the crowd, the soldiers, the Romans, the Pharisees. And it's interesting to me that in her video, soprano Amanda Balistrieri mentions the same thing about the gentleness and the sound of the Baroque instruments. Singers have the ability to use consonants and words and color to get the meaning of words across. I'm asking the choir to do quite a lot of word painting. So, besides tone color, articulation, and dynamics, singers have language to evoke the drama. They say, kreuzige, meaning crucify. What is one of the ways that instrumentalists can express the text?
I would say that's my main job as a concertmaster, is to put the bowings in the part. And the bowings that I put in, I tried to look not just at the music, but also at the words. Which words have accents, which syllables are elided, where do we need to take a breath? All of those things are reflected in our bowing, because so often the instrumentalists are playing the text.
Is your role different from that of the singers, or is it the same thing?
We play exactly with the choir. So in the chorales, for example, we double the choir. So then we should be exactly playing the words. Sometimes we have our own parts with the choir. Sometimes we're soloists and we're equal to the solo singers. We have our own solo lines, and you'll often hear two instruments playing with the solo singer. And sometimes we have our own part. For example, in the opening chorus, we're sort of a murmur under everything. And we have our own role to play. Maybe it's almost sort of mood music or setting the scene rather than reinforcing what the singers do.
Tell me about the European tradition of presenting the passions.
Yes, I think in Northern Europe, or certainly in the Netherlands and Germany, it's a passion obsession. So at this time of year, around Easter time, every weekend, there are passion concerts. And I think there are hundreds in just the Netherlands during this time of year. And indeed, I have played the passions in the Netherlands and Germany. And I think the most exciting moment was to play it in Leipzig, where it was originally performed.
These hundreds of performances of passions, are they just in the large cities?
No, they're in small towns, they're in churches, they're in concert halls, they are over the whole country.
And is this a religious tradition, or would you say it's a concert tradition?
It certainly has religious overtones because most of the performances happen around Easter time, and especially on Good Friday.
That's quite different than in the US, when we can perform these major works without concern or consideration for the liturgical time of the year. Speaking of differences, Mimi, please tell me about your Baroque violin.
Yes, well, I have my violin with me. I don't know if you can see it. This is set up as a violin would have been in box time. So I don't know if you can see. I think for violinists, the most difficult thing is there's nothing to hold on to. There's no chin rest. So that's tricky. And I don't know if you can see there are three pure gut strings and only one silver wound string, which gives it a very, very different sound, much less metallic, much less harsh than with metal strings would be. And the bow, I have a whole quiver of bows, this very pointed tip, and it's much shorter than a modern bow. I don't know if you can, I'll put these two bows at the same place, and one is substantially longer than the other. So, and this is I'd say a Bach bow, and this is a Mozart bow. So every time period had its own equipment. You could play, I guess, anything on any bow, but having the right equipment makes it so much easier and allows you to produce the sound and the articulations without having to work so hard.
I understand in the last decade you've had conversations with some of the first generation of Baroque violinists living in the 20th century. These are the players who had to experiment and research and read instructional Baroque treatises. These are the violinists who couldn't go to a store and buy gut strings or a Baroque bow, and they certainly couldn't listen to recordings, and they didn't know necessarily how something might be played other than through their research and their experimentation.
No, I was lucky enough to interview figures such as Marie Leonhardt and Elise Harnoncourt, Jaap Schroeder, people who are no longer with us. So I felt very honored that I had the moment to speak to them and hear all of their stories about how they started to play the Baroque violin way back in the 40s and the 50s.
Mimi, your interviewing these early music leaders was really just in time to find out what their experiences were and to gather this information before they passed on. What did you find? What did you learn from talking to these violin pioneers?
We have a much easier time than they had. They really had to sort of dig up all this information for the first time and do lots of research about instruments and about the first editions of music and how did it sound and how should we approach it. And they did an amazing amount of work that we have been lucky enough to inherit. Well, I think it's incredibly exciting, and I'm looking forward to playing with some of my string colleagues with whom I've played before in Colorado. And I think it's really important for initiatives such as this to help bring early music and this special sound world to the audiences in Colorado. So I'm excited to be coming back and hear the choir again and hear some of the soloists I've also heard before and to play with some of old colleagues and to meet some new ones. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to it.
Hello, this is going to be a little talk about Bach and his St. John Passion at the request of Ivan Brown. There couldn't be a better reason to do this. Bach has written 3 masterpieces amongst many other smaller works, both Passions, St. John and St. Matthew, and then the B minor Mass, of course. Those belong to the big highlights of Western music in general. Could be compared to Beethoven Ninth or Benjamin Britten's War Requiem. The St. John is shorter than the Matthew Passion. Matthew Passion is 3.5 hours, St. John only 2 hours. The Matthew is for 2 orchestras, 2 choirs, and 2 handfuls of soloists. And the Johannes Passion is a bit more chamber music-like. It's more transparent, but equally expressive and dramatic. Both Passions have 3 layers, I call them, which is, if it were staged, then there would be a different set of stage sets and lighting for A, another for B, and yet another for C. A is the text from the Bible, which is sung by the evangelist and the Jesus role. This is only seco-recitative in the St. John Passion, and nothing is added to the text. It's just the old-fashioned German Bible. This is interrupted many times by a reaction, and the reaction is very artful. It's a poem and an orchestral accompaniment for the poem. Those are the arias, or sometimes a choir, like the opening choir and the final choir. That is the second layer. The third layer is the chorals, which can be compared to the hymns in a church service. The churchgoers, the audience, in those years knew by heart the melodies of the chorals and the words, but they are appropriate to what just is told by the evangelist and the Jesus singer. So those are the 3 layers. The text from the Bible, the reactions in a very artificial way, in a very artful way, and the reactions by the community, by the churchgoers. Now, of course, today we have Baroque orchestras and singers who try to perform in a Baroque manner. And you will today hear the what's called authentic approach to Baroque music, organized by Ivan Brown and Mimi Mitchell. Ivan wanted to know from me what's my idea about singing with modern instruments, the regular way like we used to do it for decades, and the Baroque instruments. There is, the modern instruments are bigger in sound and a little thicker in sound, so you simply have to give more as a singer. The Baroque instruments are more gentle, more transparent. And then there is a half tone difference. The Baroque pitch is a half tone below the modern pitch. Also, Ivan wanted to know whether I prefer singing the arias, the bass baritone arias, or the Jesus part, because it's always either one or the other. Well, if you want to really sing beautiful lines, beautiful melodies, very lyric, then the arias are better because it's a lot of music and it's accompanied by a beautiful orchestra and interesting obbligato instruments. But, of course, singing the Jesus part, which is only accompanied by continuo, by secco continuo, is the leading role. It's the subject of the whole thing. So that's a more honorable task. These are some thoughts. I could go on like this, but I hope this is enough for you to start enjoying this performance.
My name is Dr. Deborah Kaufman, and I'm a professor of music history and literature at the University of Northern Colorado. And I'm talking a little bit about the choir in St. John's Passion and the role that it plays, and a little bit about it in general. So the choir in this piece is written in 4 parts: soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and accompanied by the orchestra. This is an arrangement that he uses in all of his church music that includes choir, except for the Magnificat and the B minor Mass, both of which has 5 voices with 2 soprano parts, 1 and 2. These 4-part pieces are much more common, though, in his works. The choir basically serves 3 different functions. There are large-scale movements at the beginning and near the end of the piece for choir and orchestra. The opening movement is Herr unser Herrscher, and then the next to the last movement is Ruht wohl. And they frame the piece, but the last movement is a chorale setting, which I'll mention in a bit. The other role that the choir plays is as the turba, which is Latin for crowd. And these are responses by a crowd, typically to Pilate and also to Jesus. In one recitative, he asks, "Whom do you seek?" And the choir answers, "Jesum from Nazareth," Jesus of Nazareth. There's also a number that are soldiers casting lots over Jesus's garments. Then there's the chorale settings, is the third role that the choir plays. They sing 4-part harmonizations of chorale melodies that would have been sung by the congregation in a Lutheran service. Both these opening and closing movements that I mentioned, the Herr unser Herrscher and Ruht wohl, are both in a da capo form, which means that you have an A section of music, and then you have a B section of music, and then you return and sing or play, or both, the A section again, exactly as it was performed the first time. So it's basically an A, B, A form. We see that in Herr unser Herrscher. In the A section, the text is, "Lord our Master, whose fame is glorious in all lands." And the B section text is, "Show us through your passion that you are God's true Son, even in his great lowliness." Then the Ruht wohl movement is second to last. It's also an ABA form or a da capo form. The A section text is "Rest well, you holy bones, that I no longer must mourn, and bring me also to rest." And then the B section text is "The grave that is intended for you and holds no further distress opens heaven for me and closes hell." This is da capo. You have an A section, B section, and a repeat, exact repeat of the A section. But within the A section, there are musical sections repeated so that the whole effect is of a rondo, which is a type of form where you have a recurring musical section that comes back and alternates with other sections of music. So you'll hear the root vol section a number of times. The piece itself is a lullaby that's very gentle, but also serious. It's a beautiful, beautiful movement. For the turba sections, these are generally a lot shorter than these two choruses that frame the work. Several of them are a little bit longer and often use complicated compositional techniques. So a couple of them have chromatic descending and ascending lines, so they move by half step. And these are unimportant words. They really highlight, underscore these words. One is Übeltäter, which means evildoer, and another is töten, which means kill. So they're very strong words. Then there are a couple of other of these turba sections that are fugue-like. They use imitation in a specific manner of a fugue, which is a technique that has specific rules for how the voices need to enter. They sing the same melodic material, but at different pitch levels. And there are these rules that dictate the intervals between the intervals of notes, of pitches between the entrances of the voices. Two of them have this fugal form that at least one of them is very much connected to the text. It's "Wir haben ein Gesetz," which means we have a law, which you could also mean we have a rule, which is what a fugue is. It's rules. The chorale settings, there's quite a number of them in here. I want to first of all kind of differentiate between what is a chorale and what is a setting of a chorale, or what is a harmonization of a chorale. The chorale is actually the melody, just the melody that has a German text. And these are sung in the services for the Lutheran servicers throughout the church year at different seasons and Sundays. So each Sunday has a specific chorale, each holiday has a specific chorale. And these are the melodies, and they were very familiar to the congregation because you would hear them every year. And actually some of them I think are repeated more than once during the year. But they're set in harmonizations with the melody in the top voice and the lower voices filling out the chords below them. Now, Bach's harmonizations were not the only ones of these chorales that were written, but his are definitely the best. They're the most complicated, the most harmonically rich. In fact, Bach, in his early career as a church musician, organist, and well, mostly organist in Arnstadt, was rebuked by his employers when they were complaining that he was making his chorale accompaniments too complicated. And I have a quote here from the document. It says, "The consistory reproves Mr. Bach, Herr Bach, for having hitherto made many curious variaciones in the chorale and mingled many strange tones in it, and for the fact that the congregation has been confused by it." So basically they're saying, these are really complicated and we're having a hard time singing along. What's interesting with this piece is that the final movement of the entire Passion is a chorale setting, and with a text that's suitable for the occasion. To kind of shorten it, "O Lord, let your little angel at my end carry my soul to Abraham's lap. Let my body lie there without any trouble or pain to rest until the new day," which would be the resurrection. This is very fitting to have this large movement to end with this very simple, well, simple for Bach, setting of a chorale melody, because it brings the congregation together. They can all sing it together and make a communal event out of this amazing piece of music. I hope you enjoy it.
Which Jesus? Jesu von Nazareth. So I'm getting a little bit Jesum von Nazareth even. Jesum von Nazareth. Okay, one more time by memory. Here we go. Without you. And one. Jesum von Nazareth. Jesum von Nazareth. Jesum von Nazareth. Yeah, that's great.
Hello everyone, my name is Santiago Gutierrez Herrera. I'm a tenor, and today I'm going to share just a little bit about what it has been like preparing, rehearsing Bach's St. John's Passion with Seicento. We have our concert coming up in early May, so stay tuned to make sure you get your tickets in time. And one of the first things I thought about when we got these scores was there's a lot of notes. There's a lot of sharps, lots of flats, in various different key areas. And, every time I get to sing Bach, I'm always blown away by just how fast his brain worked. When it came to the way that he treated harmony, the little nooks and crannies, the turns that he would do that were so fast and just so deliberate in all the voice parts. Anytime I get a chance to look at a choral score or a full score of Bach, I'm thinking it's, like gears, like hundreds of gears coming together, and it just works perfectly. And you probably cannot change one thing without, ruining a whole section. So that is always super exciting and not at all nerve-wracking when it comes to singing Bach. So yes, it's got lots of notes, lots of consonants as we're doing this in German. And one other thing that I also really enjoy about singing Bach is this idea that he was treating voices kind of like an instrument. So at times he's not very kind to singers or to soloists, but it's always really cool to try to step back and think about what sort of affect he was trying to get at, but by treating the voice in such a way. And I feel like whenever as a unified section or a choir or a soloist can really hone into those details, it can really bring out the great affects of this kind of music that is, again, it's like clockwork. It's one of those things where like it just all comes together and it really becomes something special.
Hi, I'm Amanda Ballestieri soprano and former artistic director of Seicento Baroque Ensemble, and I'm going to be singing the soprano arias in the upcoming St. John Passion performance in May. I'm very excited to be coming back, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how important it is that we're doing this performance with Baroque instruments in the orchestra. And at this point, we have so many people who have spent a lot of time doing the research and learning the technicalities of the instruments, and people who build beautiful copies of instruments that we used at that time, and people who specialize in retrofitting violins, for example, so that they are like they were at that time. So with all that knowledge in hand, we get to experience the soundscape closer to what J.S. Bach may have envisaged, and what the audiences and the congregations heard when they heard these beautiful passions. So I think it's wonderful that Seicento Baroque Ensemble can take all the vocalists in the choir and the soloists and put them together with these beautiful instruments so we can express this text with this lovely sound. I have obviously done study of how to sing this music. I've attended many workshops about the instruments themselves out of my own interest, to see what the experts would say and to understand a little bit more about how the instruments work and the differences. So I think that and also the text are two of the important things to me about this music. So the violin, which I also play, and I also have a violin I converted so I could see how it felt to play with the bow and with the Baroque style instrument, is very different when it is Baroque style than a modern violin, which was engineered to be, louder, higher, faster, whatever. It's just a different instrument. But with the Baroque instruments, like the violin, you get quite a different phrasing because the bow is so different when you use the Baroque bow. The timbre is different because the strings are under less pressure, because the strings are made of different material, and they just have I don't know what you'd call it. It's just kind of a softer edge to the sound. So I think modern instruments and modern orchestras, what we wanted sound. We had bigger halls. They were brighter timbres to the sound. Say the silver flute, which really came in, early 20th century, when you were changing from wood to metal, and you had this much more vibrant, prominent sound. But it changes the way that you would sing, because if you're singing with a flute in a Bach aria and it's a modern flute, it's a different sound from the wooden flute of Baroque times with a smaller bore, a sweet sound, but also with an edge. It's not that it's not prominent, it's just a different timbre, a different soundscape. So I think that's very important. And again, people who've specialized in this for many years have studied how the phrases work. I think if the instruments and the vocalists follow the way that the lines need to be sung, then usually the music just works. So I think as a singer, I have always cared a lot about words. And if you have an orchestra of Baroque instruments, you have a slightly more transparent texture than you would with a modern orchestra, where the sound is, again, a bit fuller in general. It's in a way the texture is thicker, so it's a little harder to sort of be in there and not be lost in the sound. Whereas I think with Baroque instruments, it's almost like you can hear the fullness of the sound and the beauty of the sound, but also you can see the bones of the sound. And I find that fascinating and very fulfilling, and it's one of the things that makes this music so much fun. So I hope that helps to give a little window into how singers think about singing with these very special instruments, and how lovely it will be to hear this concert.
Hi, I'm Nathan Jensen, and I am an apprentice artist with Seicento Baroque Ensemble, and will be singing the bass arias of Bach's St. John Passion in our performances in May. As an apprentice artist with the group, it's given me an amazing opportunity to learn more about the Baroque style and to perform a work that I never have before. Much of the learning has come during coaching sessions with Ivan. In those sessions, we'll talk about phrasing and style and technique. Now, most of my singing background has come in opera, which has given me a really strong foundation in preparing these arias of the Bach. But there are some aspects between my opera arias that I sing regularly and these arias in the Bach that are a bit different. For instance, there's a lot more melismatic phrasing in the Bach. So Ivan and I will break those down, discuss some technique to maybe make those phrases a little bit easier to sing. Then we'll talk about how that phrase should be presented within the concept of the whole aria, and then how those two aspects kind of help the Baroque style really speak. Now, as a young singer and one who doesn't have a lot of Baroque singing experience, being an apprentice artist with Seicento is giving me invaluable knowledge and giving me this amazing opportunity to perform as well. I'm really looking forward to these performances on the 5th, 6th, and 7th of May, and I hope you will join us for one or more.
Hi, I'm Keith Collins, and I'll be playing Baroque bassoon and contrabassoon for Bach's St. John Passion. Now, Johann Sebastian Bach wrote bassoon into many of his works, both sacred and secular, and very often he uses the instrument as a bass voice to the other woodwinds, especially the oboes. Now, my bassoon here is a copy of an instrument that was probably made about the year 1700 in Germany or perhaps the Netherlands. It has 5 keys, unlike a modern symphony bassoon, which has about 20. It has these lovely Baroque turnings here on it, on the bell. Here's the double reed on the very end. I'd like to give you a sample of what it sounds like. Here's its range. And then here's a little snippet of a piece you'll hear me playing for the St. John Passion. Now then, this bassoon that serves as the bass to the oboes had other functions as generally to enforce the bass singers, and Bach was well known for using the instrument in that capacity. But this is not the only kind of bassoon that's called for in the St. John Passion. There is, in a late manuscript from about 1749, near the end of Bach's life, and someone has written in several movements should include bassono grosso. How's your Italian? It means really big bassoon. Now, it just so happens that we have 2 surviving German double bassoons or contrabassoons. I own one of about 4 that exist here in North America. I'm going to show you that instrument. Of course, in the 1700s, they hadn't really learned how to bend wood, and so they took a bassoon, just like the one you saw, and just simply made it twice as big to make a contrabassoon. All right, here we go. This is the Baroque contrabassoon, the exact same instrument you just saw, but twice as low and long. Now, I'm not sure how well my microphone was able to pick up that lowest sound there, but that was vibrating at about the frequency of 28 hertz. And I can literally feel the vibrations in my body when I play that very low note. That's a B flat, 2 octaves below the bass staff at A415. I'm really happy to be here and to be showing you these instruments. I know you'll enjoy this performance. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon.
I want to close this video by bringing up a topic that cannot be ignored, that the St. John Passion is regarded by some as being anti-Semitic. Both the St. John Passion and the St. Matthew Passions, setting of the crucifixion story from those 2 Gospels in the Bible, were written as requirements of Bach's job in Leipzig to perform a setting of the Passion on Good Friday. The St. Matthew Passion is in many ways more musically complex, with a double chorus and double orchestra and nearly 3 hours of music, but it is the St. John Passion that is far more problematic in terms of its text. In both Gospels, Bach set to music, the central problem is around the act of killing a god, specifically the crucifixion of Jesus. Compared to the other three Gospels, John's telling of the crucifixion story has an angrier tone and delivers a stronger statement that Jesus' murderers were the Jews. Parts of the Gospel of John, not necessarily set in the Passion, but included in others of Bach's cantatas, juxtapose the negative presentation of the Jews against the positive attributes of who John calls his disciples and the believers. Throughout history, sadly, Christians have justified persecution of the Jews because of the assertion that the Jews killed Jesus. While Bach had to present the gospel story as part of his job, he also had the opportunity to respond to it. Some scholars who write about Bach's choice of chorales and other texts indicate that Bach, in fact, found all people, not just the Jews, to be guilty in killing Jesus, and that Bach consistently puts the responsibility for Jesus' death back on the community of sinners, which includes everyone. Michael Marison, author of the book Bach and God, writes, "The commentary hymn following Jesus as being struck by one of the attendants of the Jews expresses matters the most forcibly. It is I, referring to Bach's Lutheran congregants, who has struck you so. I and my sins, which are as numerous as the grains of sand on the seashore." Marison says, Bach's passion moves the focus away from the perfidy of the Jews and into the sins of Christian believers. I am no biblical scholar, but I have come to understand that the negative issues around the St. John Passion stem from the writings in the gospel itself. Bach's job, as stipulated in his employment contract, was to incite the listeners to devotion, and he succeeded. He was a genius with expression and word painting. Any crowd scene in the Passion is even more vehement, any description of violence more vivid. The comparison of the depiction of the angry Jews and the more docile Christians, as in the Lutheran chorales, is stark. As I hear this telling of the story through Bach's music, the emotion for me is far stronger than any other setting of the Passion, and this contributes to the controversy. Seicento's decision to present this work put us at risk of being criticized. Choirs across the U.S. are trying to address the issues of the St. John, although I noticed it's being performed in the spring, just this spring, by Philharmonie Austin in Texas, by Bach in Baltimore in Maryland, the American Festival Chorus in Logan, Utah, Tafelmusik in Toronto, and Voices of the Ascension in New York. It was also part of this year's season performed in Denver by our colleagues in the Colorado Bach Ensemble and in numerous concerts across Europe. Seicento's decision, my decision to present this work, was also met with enthusiasm. Singers want opportunities to sing passionate and challenging work, some for the fourth time in their choral lives. Singers long for opportunities to take on monumental pieces, and audiences strongly support the presentation of larger works. I felt programming the St. John this year and being the first in Colorado to perform it with period instruments was an important step for Seicento. I hoped it would generate conversation about the issues stemming from a nearly 400-year-old musical work based on a nearly 2,000-year-old text. Seicento is not a religious organization, it's a musical one. We have talked amongst ourselves as a choir and with the board about the value of performing this spectacular music. While other artistic directors opted to change the words of the St. John Passion to soften the language, I opted to present it as originally written, but to address the struggle. It's my hope that this music, Bach's setting of this emotional text, and even my sharing these reflections with you on this video will spur your thinking about our long-held prejudices, our thoughtless actions, our human shortcomings, and our unattractive ability to avoid difficult topics. I look forward to a continued discussion. How might you use these thoughts to increase tolerance in all aspects of our lives, in our community, and in our world? I hope you'll join us in May for the St. John Passion by Johann Sebastian Bach. Thank you. Thank you.
So get your tickets. Concert dates will be May 5th, 6th, and 7th in Denver, Arvada, and Boulder, respectively. It'll be loads of fun, so we'll see you there.
And especially if you're not a soprano, give me a little bit of or a little breath. You hear it? Okay, just try it. And one. And do it again. And one. I like that. 3, 4, and 1. Thing that came out of the analysis that somebody else has done is, look, you go, bist du nicht seine Jünger ein? Bist du nicht seine Jünger ein? That was one time, and seine Jünger. Bist du nicht seine Jünger ein? Bist du nicht seine Jünger ein? You see what he's doing, even though there's one seine Jünger in measure 11, 12, but he's made it more intense. You know, are you kidding? Are you not? Aren't you the one? Aren't you the one? Aren't you the one? And so that's what we need to do. That tells us that we need to make it more intense as we go. 2 and 1.